Hello. First of all, it's a shame that we have to meet like this via a video rather than in person or as a live interaction. I'm afraid timetables just haven't been kind in this extended period of lockdown and the pandemic. What I'd like to do is to introduce to you the topic of arms, things that we have, things that we notice, and talk a little bit about how they are adapted into different sorts of purposes. Now, normally I do this with a whole set of museum specimens, but I'm at home, so I'm having to deal with the things that I've got at home, though that does include this cast of a plesiosaur, which is a prehistoric swimming reptile from the Jurassic period. I work as a zoologist. I teach zoology, which is the study of animals, though I've done my fair share of genetics, and because of that I've worked on plants a lot. So I am, I suppose, what you'd typically call a biologist. I'm interested in things that are alive. That includes the bacteria, their relatives, the archaea, and everything else, the single-celled organisms, the protists, fungi, plants and animals. But I'm really most interested in animals. And I teach that at the University of Nottingham. And what you're getting in this short introduction and the workbook that will be supplied to you is a sort of cut-down version of one of the first-year practicals that I run. I'm going to try and define my terms as I go along, but when I talk about arms, other people might call the front legs or the forelimbs. The arms to me are anything that's connected to a shoulder girdle and a clavicle. So all the vertebrates, that is the animals with a backbone, made of bone and flexible, those are the vertebrates. They include fish, amphibians, reptiles, including birds and mammals, creatures like us. And within the group of vertebrates, there are the tetrapods. The tetrapods are the animals with four limbs, tetra, four, pod, limb. And I have a vertebrate here, apart from me. So this is Roman, the leopard gecko, and he has a limb very similar to mine. Very similar indeed, in fact. Although he walks on his arm. So let's show it there. Oh, there we go. Maybe I can get him to pose for you. Oh, no, he's too busy, too interested in exploring. But the bones in his arm, in fact, the bones in most of his body, are very similar to mine in terms of number. I mean, he's got a few more vertebrae than I. He's got a longer backbone. He's got this enormous tail. But when you look at his arms, the bones are almost identical in number. They just vary a little bit. And we'll look a little at that in the time that we have together. You don't mean that. Okay. This is to contrast the limbs that we find in invertebrates. Oh. Caught it. So this is a locust. And locusts are invertebrates. They're an insect. They've got 6 limbs, so technically they'd be hexapods, 6 limbs, as opposed to tetrapods. And they are comprised they're composed of in a very different way to our limbs. So insects are arthropods, which means they have an outer skeleton made out of chitin. Sorry, I've got a lizard escaping from his little pot here. And And though they perform the same function, they don't originate in the same way. So these creatures don't have a backbone, and their limbs are hollow inside. So their muscles attach the inside of a suit of armour. They don't have a hard core with a soft outside like we do. Right, I'm going to put you back in your pot. Oh, the lizard's out again. Oh well, I'll use the lizard then. So inside this gecko's arm, I think he's seen the locust, that's why he's vocalising, he's hungry. You can see that he has a shoulder, which is here, an elbow and a wrist. And at the end of his wrist is his hand. That's exactly the same as me. Right, you're definitely going back in the pot now. So just sit quietly. So we are our own visual aid when we look at our arms and our legs and most of the rest of our skeleton as well. If you know your own arms, you know the arms of every tetrapod, be they a frog or a lizard or a tortoise or an emu or a wombat. So we have a collarbone here, the clavicle, we've got a shoulder blade at the back, and where they meet we have the joint, the shoulder joint. So we've got a single bone running from our shoulder to the elbow. That's known as the humerus. I'm sure you know these things. And then from the elbow up onto the wrist, we have two bones, which allows you the rotating action here. The longer bone at the bottom is the ulna, and on top of it sits the radius. That's in humans at least, that's a larger bone. And if you ever bump your elbow, there's a nerve that runs on the outside of the bone. That's your funny bone. So that's the ulna, the longer bone. Then we have a series of bones in the wrist. Now, again, I would have a better prop if I were at the university. This is a facsimile of a human hand made out of plastic, but I've lost the thumb. I hunted around all morning to try and find it. So we've got the two long bones here. So that's the radius here and the ulna. Then we've got a series of palm bones here, which are the carpals. And then we've got these bones of the wrist. So here, those are the metacarpals. And then the bones that form the fingers are the phalanges, finger bones. Now, we've only got two in our thumb, so we've only got one joint here. But we've got three in the rest of our fingers. That means that we can characterise the human hand as having the phalangeal formula of 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. And that's actually the same as the lizard has. Some animals, some crocodiles for instance, have an extra digit in one of the fingers. I think it's the mid finger. So that would be 2, 3, 4, 3, 3. And if you look at some of the fossil reptiles, they've got many more, and some other creatures have fewer. So bird wings, they have the same humerus, radius and ulna. Then they've got fused carpals and metacarpals. They've got slightly different wrist bones to us as well. But they're all variations on a theme. And that's how we start looking for patterns in nature. We find these patterns and we try and make sense out of them. And the sense is that they have a single origin. So all of us tetrapods have an ancestor in common if you go back far enough in time. Some quite fish-like creature it was that maybe lived in the shallow waters of a swamp, and instead of wiggling its tail to swim, it paddled and walked on the bottom of the water, and then occasionally would gulp for air rather than breathe through its gills. Like goldfish do that. If you If you ever see them in a pond which doesn't have enough oxygen with, they gulp air. Some other fish have basically lungs in them. So there are 3 types of lungfish. But we're getting distracted from arms. So in the tetrapods, we have this pattern: 1 bone, 2 bones, many bones in the wrist, and then 5 bones, 5 of these palm bones, metacarpals, and 5 fingers. That is a pattern that we see throughout nature. When you come to the wrist and the palm and the fingers, that's where you get variation. But it looks really strongly as though we are all descended from a 5-fingered ancestor. Now, the reason why I've got this plesiosaur, I just happened to bring it home for the evening when lockdown came, so I've been stuck with it ever since, is that we see the same patterns of bones in the ichthyosaur. This is a plesiosaur, long-necked reptile. We'll come on to the ichthyosaurs in a minute. So, if I can direct you to this beautiful specimen, this is one that was discovered by Mary Anning in Lyme Regis in the early 19th century. If you look carefully here, this is an arm there's the other arm. It's obviously a vertebrate, it's got a strong vertebrae. This is one of its legs. The legs and the arms look quite similar. And what we can see here is that the same pattern of bones occurs in a plesiosaur as it does in us. We have a humerus, we have a greatly reduced radius and ulna, then we have a series of wrist bones, the carpals, then a row of metacarpals, and then a number of phalanges. And instead of having just 2 or 3 phalanges, they have many. So the thumb here is 1, 2, 3, and then first fingers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So a different phalangeal formula. So that's called polydactyly, when they've got enough. Polyphalangy. Polydactyly is when they have extra fingers. And that's not seen in the plesiosaurs, but it's seen in the ichthyosaurs. So what is an ichthyosaur? Well, this is where I'm now relying on the toys in our house. So this is an ichthyosaur. It is a fully marine reptile that swam in the Mesozoic oceans, in the Triassic and Jurassic and part of the Cretaceous period. And if you think that looks like a fish, it does. It does look like a fish. Even if the fish is something like this, a shark, which has a cartilaginous skeleton, so it's not bony, or a bony fish like this. I'm trying to show the tail as we go along. So ichthyosaurs, their body shape was very similar to fish. Not only ichthyosaurs, but of course we're more familiar with these creatures, dolphins. Dolphins and ichthyosaurs look very similar, and both of them look a bit like a fish. And there were other prehistoric animals that also were fish-like. We have, this is a long-necked plesiosaur. This is one of the short-necked plesiosaurs, Leopleurodon. This is a prehistoric marine crocodile. And as you can see, it has a fish-like tail and 4 paddles. And this is a mosasaur. Mosasaurs were giant, fully aquatic lizards, relatives of the monitor lizards that we still have today. So the question is that why do we have all these shapes, and how have they got to be that way? Now, dolphins are descended from 4-legged hairy mammals that return to the water. Ichthyosaurs are descended from four-legged, maybe scaly reptiles that went back to the water. These sea crocodiles are descended from basically crocodiles that took up a completely aquatic mode of life. The mosasaurs from a lizard that went back to swimming in the sea. So we have this avenue of shape. They all start to look similar, even though they come from different ancestors. The different fish, I'm dropping them now. The different toy fish that I have, that's a flying fish, they all came from an ancestor that looked pretty similar to them. They had the fins, they had the gills, but all these other creatures, the mosasaurs, the ichthyosaurs, the plesiosaurs, the dolphins, they're creatures that whose ancestors were on land and went back to the sea. And that is a biological term we call convergence. And it seems from our understanding of the fossil record and from looking at DNA sequences in the animals, the whales and dolphins that we have left, and they're still alive at the moment, that this pattern of becoming fish-like is very common. And it has been repeated in the fossil record in all these different creatures that I've just mentioned. It looks like if you're going to make a living swimming in the sea, you're eventually going to look a bit like a fish. So what do we have in the oceans today that are slightly fish-like, that are not fish? Well, we have the dolphins and the whales, but we also have the seals, and which come out on land really just to sunbathe and to have their babies. But the other creatures have gone back to the sea completely. The dolphins never come onto land. And one of the big questions about the ichthyosaurs were, how do they breed? How did they come? When you're looking so much like a fish, how can you waddle on land, make a nest and lay your eggs? And the answer is they didn't. They gave birth, like dolphins, to live babies, which, similar to dolphins, were ejected into the sea tail first so they don't drown. So ichthyosaurs not only looked like dolphins, they gave birth like dolphins too, because you can't afford, you can't come on land to lay your eggs when you're so well adapted to the sea. What we have, therefore, and this is the pattern that I'm hoping to explore with you in the worksheet, is that continually through the history of life on Earth, we have terrestrial animals, otter-like things, crocodile-like things, monitor lizard-like things, that return to the sea and become adapted to live in the sea. And the best thing for living in the sea is, because of the streamlining and the constraints imposed by the physics of water, is to look like a fish. So they gradually adapt and become more and more fish-shaped, even though their origins are different. So dolphins and ichthyosaurs and mosasaurs look the same because of convergence. They don't have a common ancestor like the fish do, which was fish-like. They have independently acquired fish characteristics. And we don't only see that in these swimming creatures. When we look at creatures that fly, they have to have a large surface area and a light body. So the locust, which flies, has big wings which it unfurls when it can. We've got birds which have a big surface area formed by feathers which grow out of their skin. But the other creatures that fly, bats, they have also adapted their arms so that they can have a flight membrane. So they've kept their thumb free, but enormously elongated all their other fingers and have a flap of skin that connects between them and their body, and that forms the wing. There's another creature that did that as well, sadly extinct, and those were the pterosaurs, the flying reptiles of the Mesozoic. Unlike bats, they solved the issue of having a wing slightly differently. They kept their thumb and the first two fingers free, and then enormously elongated their ring finger and hung their flight membrane on that. They also grew wrist bone, because they had another flap of skin running on the top of their arm to their shoulder, and there was that wrist bone was able to adjust the angle of the skin to give them the flight characteristics. Now, we don't have any pterosaurs still alive with us now, they're all extinct, but they were tremendously successful for a huge amount of time. Not only that, but they also became the largest living creatures to fly, with ones like Quetzalcoatlus having the wingspan of a small plane. They might not act as they did in some of the Jurassic World movies, but they were big flyers. And when you think that a Quetzalcoatlus standing on the ground with on its four limbs, its arms and its legs, could look a giraffe in the eye and then take to the skies and fly off, we've got some very impressive creatures in the history of life on this planet. Anyway, I hope that makes sense to you. And now, if you would take a look at the workbooks that I've supplied, there are some examples which cement the sorts of things that we've been talking about in this short lecture. I wish you all the best. Bye.